Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into a journey back to the Viking Age, a time of longboats, sagas, and surprisingly complex funeral arrangements. Imagine yourself not as a fierce warrior, nor as a noble jarl, but perhaps as someone standing just off to the side, observing the final send-off. The air is crisp, carrying the distant scent of wood smoke and salt water. You can almost feel the rough wool of your tunic against your skin, the slightly damp chill seeping up from the muddy ground. It's a scene steeped in ritual and finality, and tonight, we're going to explore one of the most dramatic forms of Viking burial, the cremation. Specifically, we're going to tackle a rather niche question. How exactly would you know if you were the chosen ritual assistant for one of these fiery farewells? Spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly advertised with a LinkedIn posting. You probably won't survive this experience, at least not metaphorically, without drifting off to sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you find yourself in a Viking settlement, minding your own business, maybe sharpening a tool or mending some fishing net. Life is ruggedly simple. And then, word spreads that someone important has died. This isn't just any death, this is the passing of a significant individual, someone whose status demands a farewell that will echo in memory and perhaps even guide their spirit effectively into the next realm. Whatever the nuanced beliefs about that realm might have been depending on the specific time and place within the vast Viking world. We're talking about jarls, powerful chieftains, wealthy merchants, maybe even certain highly respected women or priests and priestesses, depending on the period and region. Not everyone got the full pyre treatment, mind you. Most people likely received far simpler burials, perhaps just buried in the ground with a few personal possessions, maybe under a small mound. But for the elite, the stakes were higher, and the funeral rites were grander, sometimes involving incredible displays of wealth and power, like the famous ship burials where the deceased was placed in their vessel, often with grave goods, and then either buried in a mound or, in some cases, set ablaze on a massive pyre, sometimes even within the ship itself. This latter, fiery option, the cremation, is our focus. Now, why cremation? Well, the reasons aren't universally agreed upon, which leads us to one of those open scholarly debates. Historians still argue whether cremation was primarily seen as a way to purify the deceased and their possessions, to release the spirit more quickly from the physical body, or perhaps as a status symbol, simply because it required vast amounts of fuel and labor, demonstrating the wealth and influence of the family who could afford such a send-off. It might have been a mix of all these factors, or perhaps varied in meaning from one community to another. What is a mainstream historical fact is that cremation was a relatively common burial practice among the Norse people, particularly in earlier periods of the Viking Age before Christianization became widespread. Archaeological evidence from sites across Scandinavia and lands settled by Vikings shows numerous examples of cremation graves, from simple pits to elaborate pyres. But back to you. You're just a regular person in this settlement. Maybe you're a thrall, someone of unfree status, or maybe you're a free farmer or craftsman, perhaps even a lower-ranking member of the deceased's household. You haven't exactly been angling for a promotion, especially not one tied to a funeral pyre. Yet, there are whispers, glances, a subtle shift in how people interact with you. This isn't like being picked for dodgeball in school. There's no official announcement over a scratchy loudspeaker. It's more organic, more traditional. It's intertwined with community dynamics and the specific needs of this particular ritual. You might notice that you're being included in conversations you weren't before, or perhaps you're being tasked with small but significant errands related to the mourning household. It's like suddenly everyone remembers your name, and not just when they need you to move something heavy. This heightened attention, this subtle change in your daily interactions, could be one of the very first, almost imperceptible, hints that you are being considered for a role in the upcoming ceremony. It's not a direct question, more of a slow realization dawning upon you as the community activity pivots around the preparations for this important death. It's a quirky or fringe tidbit of understanding that such roles weren't necessarily assigned via a formal selection process we'd recognize today, but rather through a mix of suitability, availability, perhaps existing social standing or lack thereof, and the specific requirements of the deceased or their family's wishes. You aren't given a handbook, you're just expected to sense it, perhaps. Or maybe someone just points at you and says, "You? Come here." Either way, the wheels are turning, and you're potentially about to get a front row seat, and a very hands-on role, in one of the most dramatic spectacles of Viking life. So, as we established, this isn't just any villager who's passed on. The person being prepared for this fiery send-off was someone of considerable standing in the community. Think of them as the local VIP, the big cheese, the person whose opinion actually mattered beyond what to plant next spring. We're talking about individuals who held power, wielded influence, or possessed significant wealth. This could be a jarl, a chieftain who ruled a territory, led warriors, and settled disputes. It could be a successful merchant who amassed riches through trade, perhaps bringing back exotic goods from far-off lands. Imagine the Viking equivalent of someone who owns a small fleet of container ships today, minus the pollution, or maybe plus the pollution, depending on how well they maintain their longboats. It could also be a powerful woman, perhaps a respected matriarch or a priestess with significant religious authority. The key factor is their status. Their death wasn't just a personal loss to their family, but a moment of transition for the entire community structure. Contrast this with the vast majority of people in the Viking Age. Your average farmer, fisherman, or craftsman, while vital to the functioning of society, wouldn't typically receive such an elaborate and costly funeral. Their burials would be much simpler, maybe a shallow grave, a few personal items like tools or a knife, and a small marker, if anything. It's like the difference between a state funeral and, well, just a regular funeral today. This wasn't about being better in a moral sense, but about reflecting the social hierarchy and the individual's position within it. The scale of the funeral was a direct mirror of the deceased's worldly importance. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological evidence consistently shows a correlation between the richness and complexity of a burial and the likely status of the person buried within it. Sites like Sutton Hoo in England, though technically Anglo-Saxon but showing Norse influence, or numerous mound burials in Scandinavia, are prime examples of this status display. They weren't just burying a person, they were burying a legacy, a set of relationships, and a position of power. For you, observing this, it's a stark reminder of your own place in the pecking order. You're not the one getting the send-off worthy of a sagas. You're on the periphery, noticing the shift in everyone's demeanor, the way people speak in hushed tones, the sudden urgency in certain tasks. The focus is entirely on the deceased and their family, and the meticulous planning required for this major event. It's not like planning a backyard barbecue. This is a multi-day operation involving significant resources and coordination. The decision to perform a cremation, especially one on a large scale, wasn't taken lightly. It required mobilizing labor for gathering fuel, potentially constructing a pyre, preparing grave goods, and arranging the various ritual components. This undertaking itself reinforces the deceased's status. Only someone truly important could command such an effort from their community or household. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these elaborate burials was solely for the deceased's journey to the afterlife, or if a significant part of it was a very public, very expensive display for the living community, demonstrating the power and continuity of the family or lineage left behind. Was it about impressing the gods, or impressing the neighbors, and potential rivals? It's likely both, as with many human rituals. But the sheer amount of valuable goods sometimes included in these burials, weapons, jewelry, tools, even sacrificed animals or, in some very rare and chilling cases like the account by Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan, human sacrifices, suggests a strong element of status display. Imagine burying your most prized possessions with you. It's a bit like deciding to be buried with your entire cryptocurrency wallet. Hope you remembered your seed phrase for the afterlife. One quirky or fringe tidbit about these high-status burials is the incredible variety of grave goods found. It wasn't just weapons or pretty things. Sometimes archaeologists find mundane items elevated by context, like gaming pieces, or even tools specific to a craft, indicating that the deceased's identity was tied to their profession or leisure activities as well as their power. You might see items being carefully selected, not just a sword, but that sword, the one with the fancy hilt, or a set of scales and weights for a merchant. This meticulous selection process would be part of the background buzz you'd pick up on. People discussing which items were appropriate, which should accompany the deceased, which should perhaps be ritually broken before being placed on the pyre. It's a strange blend of the sacred and the practical, the deeply personal and the overtly public. And the fact that you are sensing this shift, that you might be drawn into the orbit of this event, suggests something about your own position, however humble. Perhaps you are seen as reliable, or expendable, or simply the person designated for certain tasks within the deceased's household or the wider community. You're not the Jarl's closest advisor, but you're not so insignificant that you can be completely ignored either. Your role, if it materializes, won't be one of prominence, but one of utility. You won't be giving the eulogy, if they even had formal eulogies in the way we understand them, but you might be hauling the wood for the pyre. It's a subtle form of recognition, wrapped in the grim reality of a major death. And the specific nature of this death, a high-status individual receiving an elaborate cremation, is what sets this whole complex chain of events in motion, ultimately leading to the possibility of your selection as a ritual assistant. It's a lot of fuss for one person, really. Makes you wonder what kind of frequent flyer miles they were expecting to rack up on the journey. Okay, so the air is thick with the news of a significant death, and you're starting to feel noticed. This isn't a job application with a formal interview process. How exactly do you know if you've been tapped for this rather specific, and potentially grueling, role as a ritual assistant in a Viking cremation? The signs are likely subtle, woven into the fabric of daily life and community expectations. It's less about a dramatic announcement and more about a gradual shift in how you are treated and what is expected of you. One of the most telling signs might be the direct attention you start receiving from the bereaved family or members of their immediate household. If you were previously just another face in the crowd, you might find yourself being specifically addressed, perhaps given small tasks related to the funeral preparations. Maybe you're asked to fetch water, or help move certain objects, or instructed to be present at specific planning discussions, even if just to listen and be ready to assist. It's like suddenly being pulled out of the background chorus and given a minor speaking part. This increased interaction, especially from those directly involved in organizing the funeral, is a significant indicator. They are assessing your reliability, your availability, and perhaps your physical capacity for the demanding tasks ahead. Another hint could be the way others in the community start treating you. People might look at you differently, perhaps with a mixture of pity, respect, or even a touch of apprehension. Whispers might follow you. Neighbors might be more deferential, or perhaps distance themselves slightly, unsure of the nature of your impending role. This shift in social dynamics around you, the subtle acknowledgments or avoidances, can serve as an informal confirmation that your name is being considered, or has already been decided upon, for a role in the upcoming ritual. It's like everyone else got the memo, and you're left to read the tea leaves of social cues. It's a quirky or fringe tidbit that highlights how community knowledge and unspoken communication often functioned in societies without widespread literacy or formal bureaucratic processes. Your selection wouldn't be pinned to a public notice board. It would spread through the grapevine. You might also notice that you are being excused from your usual daily duties. If you're a farmer, suddenly someone else is looking after your sheep. If you're a craftsman, your usual customers are being told you're unavailable. This sudden freeing up of your time, dictated not by you but by others, suggests that your efforts are being redirected towards the funeral preparations. Your labor is needed elsewhere, for a task deemed more important than your regular contribution to the community's economy. This is a very practical sign that you are being set aside for a specific purpose related to the deceased. The nature of the tasks you are given is another strong clue. They won't be your everyday chores. You might be asked to help with the more physically demanding aspects of preparation, such as hauling large amounts of wood for the pyre, or helping to move or prepare the deceased's possessions. You might be involved in cleaning or preparing the ritual space. These tasks are specific to the funeral context and require effort and dedication. Being consistently directed towards these jobs, often alongside other individuals who seem similarly set apart, solidifies the suspicion that you are part of a selected group of assistants. A mainstream historical fact is that significant communal labor was required for elaborate Viking funerals, whether for mound building, ship dragging, or pyre construction. These were not solo endeavors, they involved mobilizing a workforce, and you, apparently, are part of it. Finally, and perhaps most definitively, there might be moments where instructions are given directly to you regarding the ritual itself, not just the preparatory work. You might be told to stand in a certain place, or to be ready to perform a specific action during the ceremony. This is when the subtle hints coalesce into undeniable certainty. It's not just helping out, it's being assigned a defined role within the ritual structure. This transition from general helper to specific functionary is the clearest signal. It's like being asked to hold the ring during a wedding. It's a specific part of the ceremony, not just helping set up the chairs. Historians still argue whether the specific roles in Viking funerals were highly formalized with designated titles and responsibilities passed down through generations, or if they were more ad hoc, with individuals chosen based on immediate need and perceived suitability for that particular funeral. Was there a chief pyre assistant lineage, or was it more like, hey, you look strong, grab that log? The evidence is scattered and open to interpretation, though accounts like Ibn Fadlan's suggest that for the grandest funerals, certain roles, like that of the enslaved woman who was ultimately sacrificed, might have been specifically, and tragically, assigned well in advance. But for roles like yours, the practical assistants, it was likely a more fluid process of selection based on who was available and capable. It's a bit like being picked for the cleanup crew after a large event. You didn't sign up, but someone needs to do it, and here you are. The quirky or fringe tidbit here is the sheer ambiguity surrounding the selection process for these supporting roles. It wasn't a guild or a union, just a need for labor and a community responding to it, or perhaps, a household simply commanding its dependents. So, if people are looking at you oddly, you're being given specific funeral tasks, and your usual work has mysteriously dried up, congratulations, or perhaps, commiserations, you might just be on the roster for the Viking cremation crew. Hope you don't mind heights or getting a bit sooty. Once those subtle hints coalesce into an undeniable truth, you are indeed marked for a role in the upcoming cremation ritual. The atmosphere around you shifts dramatically. The days leading up to the pyre are not business as usual. Time itself seems to stretch and contract, filled with a peculiar mix of somber mourning, intense activity, and underlying tension. For you, these days become a blur of specific tasks and growing anticipation, or perhaps, dread. The initial period after the death might involve a period of lying in state for the deceased, allowing people to pay their respects. This is a time of formal mourning, where sorrow is expressed, and the community acknowledges the loss. You might be involved in maintaining the space where the body rests, keeping vigil, or assisting the immediate family with practical needs. The air is thick with the smell of herbs sometimes used for preservation or masking odors, the low murmur of voices, and the rhythmic sounds of lamentation. This is a mainstream historical fact. Mourning periods and specific rituals around the body before burial or cremation were common across many cultures, including the Norse. The body was often cleaned, dressed in fine clothes, and laid out, sometimes with weapons or jewelry. But alongside the mourning, there's a flurry of logistical activity. A large-scale cremation requires immense preparation. You'll likely be involved in gathering and transporting the vast amount of fuel needed for the pyre. This isn't just a few logs for a campfire. We're talking about enough wood to sustain an intensely hot fire capable of reducing a body and substantial grave goods to ash. This could involve cutting down trees, splitting logs, and hauling them, often over considerable distances, to the designated cremation site. Your muscles will ache, your hands will become calloused, and the sheer scale of the woodpile growing day by day serves as a constant, visual reminder of the magnitude of the event to come. This is physically demanding work, and your selection as an assistant likely hinges, in part, on your ability to perform such labor. Beyond the fuel, there's the preparation of the grave goods. As we touched on earlier, the deceased will be accompanied by possessions intended to serve them in the afterlife. This could include weapons, armor, tools, jewelry, food, drink, and even sacrificed animals. You might be tasked with cleaning these items, arranging them, or carrying them to the site. Some items might be ritually broken or damaged before being placed on the pyre, perhaps rendering a sword unusable in the physical world, or releasing its spirit to accompany its owner. Witnessing this process, handling these valuable objects destined for destruction by fire, gives you a tangible connection to the deceased and the wealth they commanded. It's a quirky or fringe tidbit that the destruction of wealth was often a key part of demonstrating status in these burials. It wasn't just about having things, but about being able to afford to burn them. Talk about conspicuous consumption. The atmosphere is also charged with a sense of community gathering. People from surrounding farms and settlements might arrive to participate in the mourning and the funeral rites. Feasts might be held, involving the consumption of large quantities of food and drink. While you, as a ritual assistant, might be busy with tasks, you would still be present in this environment, observing the social interactions, the alliances being reinforced, and the hierarchical structure of the community on full display. These gatherings served important social functions beyond mourning, solidifying bonds and demonstrating the continuity of power structures. Historians still argue whether these funeral feasts were primarily religious observances aimed at honoring the deceased and appeasing deities, or if they were more secular events, functioning as political gatherings and displays of generosity by the family hosting them. It was likely a complex mix, but you'd be there, perhaps snatching a bite of food between hauling logs, witnessing the social drama unfold. The tension builds as the day of the cremation approaches. There's a palpable shift from preparation to anticipation. The conversations become more focused on the impending ceremony. You might overhear discussions about the specific order of events, the roles of key participants, and the significance of various actions. You are no longer just a helper, you are becoming a minor player in a carefully orchestrated drama. The weight of the occasion settles upon you. You understand that you are expected to perform specific duties correctly, that there is a ritual protocol to be followed, even if you only grasp your small part of it. It's a pressure that distinguishes these final days from the initial period of mourning. You're not just grieving, you're preparing to perform. It's like getting ready for a major performance where you haven't been given the full script, just your lines, and the stakes are, well, eternally significant for the deceased, and probably pretty stressful for you. These days leading up to the pyre are a period of intense physical labor, ritual preparation, and social observation, all building towards the climactic event. All right, you've been put through the paces, hauling wood, handling grave goods, and navigating the subtle social shifts. The day of the cremation is approaching, and there's another aspect of your impending role that might become apparent: how you are expected to look. Being a ritual assistant in a Viking cremation wasn't just about physical labor, it might have involved presenting yourself in a specific way, adhering to certain visual codes associated with the ceremony. While there isn't a universally agreed-upon ritual assistant uniform that applies to every Viking cremation across all regions and centuries, the context suggests that some form of distinct appearance might have been required or customary. This isn't like getting a snappy uniform with a logo. It's more about setting yourself apart from the general mourners and attendees, signaling your specific function within the ritual. One possibility is that you might be expected to wear specific clothing. This could be simple, perhaps a plain tunic of a certain color, or made from a particular type of fabric. It might be newly made for the occasion, symbolizing purity or a fresh start for the task. Conversely, it might be older, perhaps even somewhat worn, signifying a humbler role in contrast to the fine garments the deceased might be dressed in or the attendees might wear. There's also the possibility of specific adornments, or lack thereof. You might be instructed not to wear jewelry, or perhaps to wear a specific, simple piece provided for the ritual. This sets you visually apart. This focus on clothing and appearance for ritual purposes is a mainstream historical fact observed in many cultures throughout history. Clothing is rarely just about covering your body. It often carries symbolic meaning, especially in religious or ceremonial contexts. Another aspect could involve personal grooming. While the Vikings weren't necessarily known for being squeaky clean by modern standards, remember that crocodile dung sunscreen, certain rituals might have called for specific preparations. You might be expected to wash thoroughly beforehand, symbolizing cleansing before participating in a sacred act. Alternatively, in some cultures, mourners or ritual participants might intentionally neglect their appearance, wearing simple or dirty clothes, or not washing, as a sign of grief or humility. The specific practice would depend on the local customs and the nature of this particular ritual. You might be instructed to bind your hair in a certain way, or perhaps even to uncover it if it's usually covered. These seemingly small details contribute to the visual language of the ceremony. Symbolic markings or adornments are another possibility, though perhaps a quirkier or more fringed tidbit. There's limited direct evidence for this specifically for ritual assistants in cremations, but archaeological finds and later accounts suggest symbolic practices existed. Could you be marked with something? Perhaps a smudge of ash from a previous ritual fire, or a line of ochre on your face or hands. These markings, if used, would visually identify you as someone set apart for a sacred task. It's not a face tattoo saying official pyre guy, but something more ephemeral, a temporary signifier of your role. The contrast between your appearance and that of the deceased is likely significant. The deceased would typically be dressed in their finest clothes, adorned with jewelry and symbols of their status. Your simpler, perhaps distinct, attire would highlight this contrast and emphasize your role as a servant or facilitator of their journey, rather than an equal participant in their elevated status. It's a visual representation of the hierarchy present even in death rites. Historians still argue whether the appearance requirements for ritual roles in Viking funerals were strictly prescribed by religious beliefs or more influenced by social customs and the need for visual distinction during a public event. Was it about spiritual readiness, or simply making sure everyone knew who was supposed to be doing what? It's hard to say definitively from the archaeological record alone. However, the importance of appearance in signaling status and identity in Viking society is well documented. Your appearance as a ritual assistant would likely serve both practical purposes, making you identifiable, and symbolic ones, signaling your role and status relative to the deceased and the community. So, as the day draws near, you might find yourself being presented with specific garments, instructed on how to prepare yourself physically, or perhaps even marked in some way. These preparations aren't just about getting ready for physical labor, they're about transforming you, visually, into a participant in the ritual. You are being physically and visually set apart for this task, becoming a recognizable figure within the unfolding ceremony. It's a visual cue to everyone present, and perhaps to the spiritual world, that you have a specific function in this final act. It's not exactly a glow-in-the-dark vest for safety, but it serves a similar purpose of identification, albeit in a far more ancient and mystical context. With your role becoming clear and perhaps your ritual appearance sorted, one of the most physically demanding aspects of preparing for a grand Viking cremation involves a seemingly simple task, but on a massive scale: gathering the fuel. This isn't just scrounging for fallen branches. You need enough wood to create an inferno hot and long-lasting enough to consume a body and significant grave goods. Your hands, already sore from previous tasks, are about to get even more acquainted with hard labor. Think about the sheer volume required. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest these pyres could be substantial structures, consuming vast quantities of timber. A mainstream historical fact is that cremations require a significantly higher temperature and longer burn time than simply burning a body. You need a controlled, sustained fire. To achieve this, you need dense, dry wood, and a lot of it. So, your task, along with others selected for this heavy work, would involve venturing into nearby forests or woodlands to cut down trees. Not saplings, but mature trees capable of providing substantial logs and branches. This process wasn't just felling trees, it involved processing the wood. The logs needed to be cut to size, split into smaller pieces to ensure they burned efficiently, and then transported to the cremation site. Imagine the sound of axes ringing through the forest, the groans of falling trees, the rhythmic thud of mauls splitting wood. This is the soundtrack to your days leading up to the pyre. You'd be working alongside others, coordinating efforts to handle the heavy timbers. It's a communal effort born out of necessity, a shared physical burden that reinforces the collective nature of these rituals, even for the assistants. Transporting the wood would be another major undertaking. Depending on the distance to the cremation site and the terrain, this could involve dragging logs by hand, using simple sleds, or perhaps even loading them onto carts pulled by oxen or horses if available. If the site was near a waterway, boats might be used for transport, easing the burden somewhat but requiring different logistics. Every piece of wood represents energy, both the energy needed to gather it and the energy it will release in the fire. You are, essentially, gathering the fuel that will power the deceased's final journey. It feels significant, almost elemental. There might also be specific types of wood preferred, although this is more of a quirky or fringe tidbit, as direct evidence is scarce. Some cultures believed certain woods had symbolic properties, or burned more effectively or cleanly. While Vikings likely prioritized practicality, what was available and burned well, there might have been local traditions or preferences. Perhaps they favored hardwoods for a longer burn, or aromatic woods for the smell. You wouldn't necessarily know the why, but you'd know what to cut. The sheer quantity of wood needed offers another layer of historical insight. Historians still argue about the environmental impact of Viking Age practices. Were large-scale cremations, along with shipbuilding and iron production, significant factors in deforestation in certain areas? Or were the populations relatively small enough, and woodlands extensive enough, that the impact was localized and manageable? Gathering the fuel for a single large pyre would consume a considerable number of trees, highlighting the resources invested in these death rituals. It wasn't sustainable in the way we understand it today, but perhaps it was sustainable within the ecological constraints and population density of the time. Your role in this is crucial. Without the fuel, there is no pyre, and without the pyre, this specific ritual cannot happen. You are a vital cog in a large, labor-intensive machine. The repetitive physical work gives you plenty of time to think, or perhaps, to just focus on the task at hand to avoid thinking about the impending ceremony. You might develop a certain rhythm, working alongside others, the silence broken only by the sounds of labor and the occasional shout of instruction. It's a primal task, connecting you to the very basic elements that will be harnessed in the ritual: earth, where the trees grew; air, for the fire, and fire itself. You're literally bringing the heat. And hopefully, you don't accidentally drop a log on your foot, because workers' comp wasn't exactly a thing back then. So, hands blistered and muscles aching, you continue to gather the fuel, log by log, branch by branch, building the foundation for the fiery farewell. It's a testament to the importance placed on these rituals that such immense effort was dedicated to this single aspect. The preparation continues, and as the fuel pile grows, the discussion turns to the structure upon which the deceased will be placed, the pyre itself. When thinking of elaborate Viking burials, many people immediately picture a ship burial, perhaps set alight and pushed out to sea. And while the romantic image of a burning longship sailing into the sunset is powerful, and did happen in some cases, especially in sagas and perhaps for very high-status individuals near the coast or navigable rivers, cremation could also occur on land, often involving a pyre built on or around the remains of a ship, or simply a substantial platform constructed for the purpose. The connection to ships in Viking funerals, even land-based cremations, is a mainstream historical fact. The ship was a powerful symbol in Viking society, representing travel, journey, wealth, and perhaps the passage to the afterlife. Many burials, even non-cremations, involved placing the deceased in a ship or outlining a grave with stones in the shape of a ship. For cremations, the pyre was sometimes built directly within a dismantled or specially constructed ship hull placed on land. The deceased and their grave goods would be laid out inside the ship, and then the entire structure, filled with fuel, would be ignited. This combined the symbolism of the ship journey with the transformative power of fire. Sites like the Oseberg burial mound in Norway, though primarily a burial rather than cremation, contained a remarkably preserved ship, illustrating the central role these vessels played in funeral rites. However, not every cremation involved a ship. Equally common, or perhaps even more so depending on the region and time period, were cremations performed on large, purpose-built pyres constructed solely from wood and other flammable materials. These pyres were often massive platforms or mounds of timber, carefully arranged to ensure maximum airflow and sustained burning. Your role as a ritual assistant, particularly with all that fuel you've been gathering, directly ties into the construction and fueling of this structure, whether it incorporates a ship or not. If it's a ship-based pyre, you might be involved in moving the vessel, or its remains, to the cremation site, propping it up, and filling its hull with fuel. If it's a non-ship pyre, your work involves building the pyre itself. This isn't just stacking wood haphazardly. The pyre needs to be constructed in a way that creates a strong draft, drawing the flames upward and ensuring the fire reaches the necessary intensity to consume the body and grave goods. This could involve building a crisscrossing structure of logs, creating internal spaces for airflow, and potentially incorporating stones or earth to support the weight and contain the fire. You'd be working under instruction, perhaps from someone with specific knowledge of pyre construction, a sort of ancient pyrotechnician, though probably without the sequin jacket. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to pyre construction is the possibility that certain materials were used not just for fuel, but for symbolic purposes or to enhance the fire. Were specific resins or oils added to make the fire burn hotter or smell different? Were certain herbs or plants woven into the pyre structure for symbolic reasons? While difficult to prove archaeologically, accounts like Ibn Fadlan's mention the use of specific materials and rituals around the pyre before ignition. You might find yourself handling bundles of straw, pitch, or other flammable materials meant to help the fire catch and spread quickly. Historians still argue about the precise techniques and knowledge involved in building an effective cremation pyre. Was it a specialized skill passed down through families or individuals? Or was it a more generally understood communal task, with basic principles known by many? The success of the cremation, reducing the remains effectively, depended heavily on the pyre's construction. A poorly built pyre might smolder rather than burn intensely, failing to complete the ritual transformation of the deceased. Your work in laying the wood, following the pattern, and ensuring adequate fuel is crucial to the success of the entire ceremony. It's like building a bonfire, but if the bonfire failing meant your chief didn't get into Valhalla. No pressure. So, whether you're helping wedge logs into the hull of a ship or carefully stacking timber for a massive freestanding pyre, your understanding of the pyre's structure grows. You see how the wood is layered, how space is left for airflow, how the foundation is built to support the weight. You are not just gathering fuel, you are participating in the architecture of fire, building the funeral bed that will be consumed by flames. It's a stark, tangible manifestation of the end of a life and the beginning of a final journey, and your hands are literally in the thick of building it. Just try not to think about how hot it's going to get standing next to that thing. The pyre is taking shape, a substantial structure dominating the landscape, either incorporating the familiar lines of a ship or standing as a formidable mound of timber. With the fuel gathered and the pyre mostly constructed, the next stage is the procession to the cremation site. This is a formal movement, a public event that marks the physical transfer of the deceased from the place of mourning to the place of final transformation. You, as a ritual assistant, will be part of this procession, albeit in a supporting role. The location of the cremation site would likely be chosen for specific reasons. It might be a traditional burial ground used by the community, perhaps on a hilltop visible from a distance, emphasizing the deceased's prominence. Or it might be a more secluded spot, depending on local custom or the specific circumstances. A mainstream historical fact is that burial and cremation sites were often distinct from everyday settlements, located on the periphery or in dedicated areas, sometimes marked by standing stones or mounds. The procession itself would be a solemn, ordered affair. The body of the deceased, perhaps laid out on a bier or within a coffin-like structure, though coffins as we know them weren't universally used, sometimes just wrapped in cloth or hides, would be carried from the dwelling where it had lain in state to the pyre site. This would likely be done by close family members or individuals of high status, reflecting their connection to the deceased. You, as a ritual assistant, would likely walk alongside or behind them, perhaps carrying some of the grave goods, tools needed for the ritual, or extra fuel. You are part of the retinue, supporting the central figures and the main focus, the body. The pace would be slow and deliberate, allowing the community to witness the procession and participate in the shared experience of escorting the deceased. Mourners and other members of the settlement would follow, creating a visible demonstration of the deceased's importance and the community's acknowledgement of the death. The sounds of lamentation might continue, mingling with the rhythmic crunch of footsteps on the ground. It's a public display of grief and respect, a final opportunity for the living to honor the departed in a communal setting. Transporting the grave goods would be a significant part of your task during the procession. Remember those valuable items you saw being prepared? Swords, shields, jewelry, tools, perhaps even dismantled carts or sleds. You might be responsible for carrying these objects, ensuring they arrive safely at the pyre site to be placed with the deceased. This gives you a very tangible connection to the wealth and status being sent into the afterlife. It's like helping someone move house, except the destination is the great unknown and all their possessions are going to be set on fire. No deposit required, presumably. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the procession might involve specific routes or stopping points. Did the procession follow a prescribed path, perhaps one with symbolic significance? Were there pauses along the way for specific prayers, chants, or rituals? While difficult to confirm archaeologically, ethnographic parallels from other cultures suggest such details are common in funeral processions. There might be specific individuals who walk in certain positions, or carry particular items, adhering to traditions that you simply follow as instructed. You are part of a moving tableau, each person in their designated place. Historians still argue about the extent to which these processions were purely religious or had significant social and political functions. Were they primarily about ensuring the deceased's spirit reached the afterlife, or were they also about demonstrating the power, wealth, and continuity of the surviving family or clan to the assembled community and any potential rivals. The public nature of the procession, involving the entire settlement and potentially visitors, certainly suggests a strong social component. It was a visual affirmation of the social order and the deceased's place within it. Your position in the procession is likely not at the front, but among the supporting cast. You are the background, ensuring the smooth execution of the physical aspects of the journey. You might be directed to clear obstacles, help carry heavier items, or ensure that the process moves according to the established rhythm. You are present for the public display, but your role is one of service, focused on the practicalities of getting everything and everyone from point A, the house, to point B, the pyre. It's a quiet, necessary role in a very public event. The journey might be short or long depending on the distance to the site, but every step brings you closer to the climax of the ritual. You are moving towards the fire, a silent, steady presence in a procession of mourning and ritual. You've reached the designated site, that commanding spot where the pyre stands, waiting. Now comes the final stage of preparation before the deceased is placed upon it, refining and potentially completing the construction of the funeral pyre itself. While you've been gathering wood and perhaps involved in the initial stages, this phase involves the detailed work that ensures the pyre functions correctly as an efficient cremation machine. Building a pyre capable of sustained, high-temperature burning is not trivial. It requires understanding principles of airflow, fuel distribution, and structural integrity. A mainstream historical fact is that effective cremations require a structure that allows air to flow beneath and through the fuel, creating a draft that feeds oxygen to the flames and carries the heat upwards. This means the pyre isn't just a solid stack of wood, it's built with gaps, layers, and perhaps a raised base. You might be involved in placing larger logs on the bottom to create a kind of grate or platform, then layering smaller wood and kindling above, ensuring there are spaces for air to circulate. Your tasks during this phase could involve precise placement of timber, fitting pieces together, and perhaps reinforcing the structure. If it's a ship-based pyre, you might be securing the hull or adding additional supports. If it's a freestanding pyre, you're building up the layers, creating the framework that will support the body and grave goods while also facilitating combustion. You might be using tools like axes, mauls, and levers to position the heavy timbers. It's physically demanding, detailed work, requiring coordination with others on the construction crew. There's also the process of placing the most flammable materials. You might be instructed to tuck bundles of dry straw, pitch, or resin-soaked rags into specific points within the pyre structure. These materials act as accelerants, helping the fire catch quickly and spread throughout the massive woodpile. This is a crucial step to ensure the pyre ignites properly and doesn't just smolder inefficiently. It's like setting up the kindling for a massive fireplace, where failure means a very awkward, smoky afternoon. A quirky or fringe tidbit might involve specific arrangements of the wood or the incorporation of symbolic elements into the pyre's structure. Were certain types of wood placed in specific locations? Were stones with carvings or runes incorporated into the base? Did the orientation of the pyre matter? While concrete evidence for highly complex symbolic pyre architecture is limited, the importance of symbolism in other aspects of Viking life and ritual makes it a possibility. You might be told to place a certain log pointing north, or to arrange kindling in a particular pattern, without being told the reason. You just follow instructions, contributing to a structure whose full symbolic meaning might be known only to the ritual leaders. Historians still argue about the level of expertise required for pyre construction and who possessed this knowledge. Was it part of the general skill set for communal projects, or was there a specialist role, perhaps connected to religious figures or those who oversaw burial rites? The effectiveness of the pyre was critical to the success of the cremation ritual, suggesting that some level of expertise was necessary. Your role might be that of a laborer following the instructions of a more knowledgeable individual who is directing the final stages of construction. This stage of building the pyre is a period of intense physical labor culminating in a moment of completion. As the last logs are laid and the kindling tucked into place, the pyre stands ready. It's a monumental structure, perhaps 10 to 20 feet high or more depending on the scale of the burial, a testament to the resources and labor invested in this farewell. Seeing the finished pyre, knowing how much work went into gathering the fuel and constructing the platform, gives you a sense of the gravity of the event. You have helped build the stage for the final act. It stands there, a silent, imposing presence, waiting for its fiery purpose to be fulfilled. It's big, it's made of flammable material, and you know exactly what's coming next. Deep breaths. The pyre is built, standing as a stark, imposing monument to the impending transformation. Now comes the central, most poignant part of the pre-ignition ritual, placing the honored deceased upon the pyre, along with the vast array of grave goods intended to accompany them on their journey. Your role as a ritual assistant is likely crucial in this process, involving careful handling and placement under instruction. The body of the deceased, which you might have seen lying in state, is now brought forward to the pyre. They would be dressed in their finest attire, perhaps wrapped in layers of cloth or furs. This is a moment of profound solemnity. Family members and important individuals might approach first, performing personal farewells or placing final items near the body. Then, with reverence and likely physical effort, as the body could be heavy and potentially stiff, the deceased is carefully lifted and placed onto the prepared surface of the pyre. This is often the highest point of the structure, placing the deceased at the center of the impending blaze. A mainstream historical fact is that the body was the central element of the pyre arrangement, positioned carefully before the fire was lit. Once the body is in place, the focus shifts to the grave goods. These aren't just tossed onto the pyre, they are often arranged purposefully around the deceased. Weapons might be placed alongside them, perhaps within reach of their hand. Jewelry and personal adornments would likely remain on the body. Tools, gaming pieces, food, and drink containers would be placed nearby, within the pyre structure. If animals are sacrificed to accompany the deceased, a practice supported by archaeological evidence from some high-status burials, their carcasses might be placed on the pyre as well. This is where your work handling the grave goods during the procession comes into play. You help lift, carry, and position these items according to the directions you are given. The sheer quantity and variety of grave goods can be astonishing, reflecting the wealth and identity of the deceased. You might be handling intricately decorated swords, heavy silver arm rings, delicately carved bone combs, or humble but necessary tools like knives or cooking pots. Each item represents a facet of the deceased's life and status, intended to serve them in the next realm. Witnessing this array of possessions being deliberately placed on a structure destined for destruction is a powerful, almost surreal experience. It's a massive investment being made in the afterlife. Imagine burning your car collection and your wardrobe. It gives you a sense of the scale. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to the specific positioning of the body and goods. Was the body oriented in a particular direction, perhaps towards the sea, or towards a specific point on the horizon believed to be the entrance to the afterlife? Were items placed in specific patterns or arrangements around the body, perhaps following some symbolic map or narrative? While hard to determine solely from scattered ashes, the meticulous nature of other Viking Age craftsmanship and ritual suggests that care was taken in these final arrangements. You might be told to place the shield to the left of the head, or the food vessel near the feet, following instructions that have a meaning perhaps unspoken to you. Historians still argue about the exact beliefs surrounding the purpose of grave goods. Were they literally intended for use in the afterlife, perhaps in a world similar to the physical one? Or were they symbolic offerings, representing the deceased's status and connections in the world they were leaving behind? The presence of both practical items and symbolic wealth suggests a complex belief system where both real and symbolic needs in the next life were considered. Your role is to physically place these items, facilitating the transfer of worldly possessions into the realm of the dead. This stage is physically demanding but also imbued with a heavy sense of ritual significance. You are in close proximity to the deceased, handling the objects most intimately associated with their life. There would be a hushed reverence, perhaps broken only by instructions or continued lamentations. Your movements would be deliberate and careful, reflecting the importance of the task. You are not just stacking items, you are participating in a sacred act of equipping the departed for their ultimate journey. As the final items are placed and the pyre is fully loaded, it stands complete, a towering structure holding the body of the deceased and their earthly possessions, ready for the fire. The air feels charged, anticipation is high. You've helped arrange the send-off, and the heat is about to be turned up, literally. With the deceased and their grave goods carefully arranged upon the magnificent pyre, the ceremony moves into the final moments before ignition. This phase is filled with pre-fire rites and offerings, actions intended to appease deities, honor the deceased, and prepare the spiritual space for the transformative power of the fire. As a ritual assistant, you might have specific, often hands-on, duties during this period. These rites could involve various forms of offering. Food and drink might be poured onto the pyre or near its base. Animals might be sacrificed nearby, with their blood potentially used in some part of the ritual, or their carcasses placed upon the pyre as grave goods, as we discussed earlier. Precious objects, beyond those already placed with the body, might be offered to the gods or the deceased, perhaps broken and cast into the fire, or laid at the base of the pyre. These aren't just casual offerings, they are significant acts of giving, meant to ensure a successful journey for the deceased and maintain good relations with the spiritual world. A mainstream historical fact is that ritual offerings, including animal sacrifice and the deposition of valuable objects, were common practices in Norse religion and funerary rites. Archaeological digs often uncover evidence of such offerings at burial sites. Libations of drink are a likely component. Mead, ale, or even something stronger might be poured onto the pyre wood or around the base. This could be symbolic of providing refreshment for the journey, or an offering to powerful entities. You might be tasked with carrying the vessels containing these drinks and pouring them as instructed, perhaps following a specific pattern or rhythm. The sweet, heavy scent of the liquid mingling with the dry smell of the wood creates a sensory layer to the ritual. Specific prayers, chants, or invocations would likely be made by religious figures or prominent members of the community. While you, as an assistant, might not be leading these, you would be present, perhaps expected to stand silently or participate in communal responses if any. The air would be filled with the sounds of voices raised in ritual, adding to the solemnity and power of the moment. You are a silent observer to the spiritual dialogue taking place. A quirky or fringe tidbit might involve the use of specific symbolic objects or actions during these pre-fire rites. Were certain plants or herbs scattered? Were specific knots tied or untied? Was there a procession around the pyre involving symbolic movements? Accounts like Ibn Fadlan's describe a range of specific, sometimes baffling, actions taken around the pyre just before it was lit, suggesting a complex ritual choreography. You might be handed a specific item to hold, or told to walk around the pyre a certain number of times, contributing to a sequence whose full meaning is not explained to you. Historians still argue about the precise nature and meaning of many of these pre-Christian Norse religious rituals. Were they intended to guide the deceased to a specific afterlife like Valhalla, Helheim, or Folkvanger? Were they aimed at preventing the deceased from returning as a malevolent spirit? Or were they primarily focused on maintaining cosmic order and securing blessings for the living community? The rites could serve multiple purposes, and your actions within them, however small, contribute to their overall efficacy, whatever that efficacy was believed to be. Another possible element during this phase is the formal saying of farewells by those closest to the deceased. Individuals might approach the pyre one last time to speak to the departed, offer personal items, or simply stand in silent remembrance. This is a deeply personal moment within the public ceremony. Your role here would be to remain unobtrusive, ensuring the space is clear and ready for those participating in these final farewells. You are a quiet guardian of the threshold between the living and the imminent transformation. The tension at this point is immense. The long days of preparation, the physical labor, the solemn procession, the careful placement of the body and goods, it all culminates here. The pyre is ready, the offerings made, the farewells spoken. The air hums with anticipation. You can feel the collective focus of everyone gathered, directed towards the massive structure of wood and its silent occupant. You've helped build the structure and prepare the contents. Now, the element of fire is about to be introduced, and you are positioned to witness, and likely assist in, that dramatic moment. It's the quiet before the storm, or rather, the quiet before the roaring inferno. All the preparation, all the solemnity, all the gathered wood and carefully placed goods, culminates in this single, dramatic moment, the ignition of the funeral pyre. This isn't like lighting a candle, it's the deliberate act of unleashing a powerful, transformative force. As a ritual assistant, you will be present for this, and depending on your specific role, you might even be directly involved in initiating the blaze. The act of ignition itself would likely be carried out by a person or persons of significance, perhaps a close relative of the deceased, a chieftain, or a religious figure. This isn't a job for just anyone, it's a symbolic act of sending the deceased on their final journey. They might use a torch, already lit from a sacred fire if one is maintained, or perhaps create a flame using flint and steel if necessary, although a pre-lit torch from an existing fire source seems more likely for a ritual of this magnitude. A mainstream historical fact is that fire was viewed as a powerful, purifying, and transformative element in many ancient cultures, including the Norse. Its use in funerals was deeply symbolic. Your potential role in the ignition phase could be varied. You might be responsible for ensuring that the ignitable materials, the straw, the pitch, the resin, are properly positioned and accessible to the person lighting the pyre. You might be tasked with handing the torch to the designated person at the crucial moment. Or, in a larger pyre, you might be one of several individuals directed to light different points simultaneously to ensure the fire catches quickly and evenly across the massive structure. Imagine the scene. The designated person lights their torch, and then perhaps signals to you and other assistants holding smaller torches to touch them to the prepared kindling at various spots around the pyre's base. As the flames begin to catch, they would spread rapidly through the dry kindling and the carefully arranged gaps in the wood structure. A small flame quickly grows into a roaring fire, consuming the lower layers of the pyre. Smoke would billow upwards, carrying the scent of burning wood and perhaps other materials. The heat would intensify almost immediately, pushing back the circle of observers. The sounds of the ritual, the chants, the lamentations, might change, perhaps becoming more intense or giving way to the roar of the fire itself. It's a sensory overload of heat, light, sound, and smoke. A quirky or fringe tidbit might relate to specific rituals performed during the initial ignition. Were specific words spoken as the torch touched the wood? Was there a particular direction from which the pyre was lit? Did the behavior of the initial flames or smoke hold significance for interpreting the deceased's journey? While specifics are sparse, the likelihood of symbolic actions accompanying such a pivotal moment is high. You might simply be told light here, but the way it is done, the precise timing or gesture, could be full of unspoken meaning. Historians still argue about the spiritual beliefs associated with the pyre fire. Was it seen as literally transporting the deceased to the afterlife? Or was it a symbolic act of purification, separating the spirit from the body? Was the smoke seen as carrying the spirit upwards? The intensity and finality of cremation certainly suggest a belief in a powerful, transformative end to physical existence and the beginning of something else. Your role in lighting the fire, however small, makes you an agent of this transformation. Once the fire is well underway, your immediate task might be to step back and ensure the safety of those around the rapidly growing inferno. Direct contact with the pyre is no longer possible, but you might be needed to manage the crowd, keep a clear space, or deal with any unexpected issues like flying sparks or collapses. You are a practical presence amidst the spiritual and dramatic spectacle. The moment of ignition is the point of no return. The pyre is ablaze, and the process of consumption and transformation has begun. The massive structure you helped build, the fuel you gathered, the body and goods you helped place, all are now being rapidly consumed by fire. It's a powerful, awesome, and perhaps terrifying sight. You stand among the onlookers, perhaps feeling the intense heat on your face, watching the flames reach skyward. You have facilitated this moment, brought the element of fire to bear, and now the true purpose of the pyre is being fulfilled. The quiet anticipation is replaced by the roar and crackle of the blaze. The journey has truly begun, propelled by fire. The roar of the fire is immense now, a hungry, living sound that dwarfs the murmurs of the crowd and consumes the air. The pyre you helped build, the structure of wood and goods you helped arrange, is now a towering furnace, licking at the sky with fierce, orange flames. The heat radiating outwards is intense, a physical force that presses against you even from a distance. You can feel the warmth on your face, pulling at the moisture in your skin, a stark contrast to the crisp air you remember from earlier. The smoke, initially thick and white or gray, might change color as the fire consumes different materials, carrying the scent of burning wood, flesh, metal, and perhaps other things less identifiable. It's a raw, primal spectacle, overwhelming the senses. Your duties don't end with the ignition. As a ritual assistant, you are still needed to manage the blaze, or at least, to manage the space around the blaze. Your primary focus now shifts from construction to maintenance and observation. The fire, while powerful, isn't entirely self-managing, especially on this scale. You might be equipped with long, sturdy poles, perhaps fire-hardened or tipped with metal, used to nudge logs, adjust burning sections, or ensure the pyre collapses in a controlled manner as it burns down. This requires strength, coordination, and no small amount of bravery. You're working near an absolute inferno, dealing with unpredictable heat and falling embers. It's definitely not a job for anyone prone to clumsy moments. Imagine trying to poke a marshmallow on a stick, but the marshmallow is a chieftain's longboat going up in flames and the stick is a 20-foot pole. Safety standards? Yeah, you left those back in the future. The fire will burn for hours, perhaps even days, depending on the size of the pyre and the amount and type of fuel used. This is not a quick process. You are committed for the duration, expected to remain vigilant and assist as needed. Your task is to ensure the fire burns efficiently and completely, reducing the body and most of the goods to ash. A mainstream historical fact is that effective cremation requires a sustained, high-temperature burn, which means these pyre fires were not short-lived events. They required careful fueling and management over an extended period. The completeness of the burn was likely seen as important for the success of the ritual transformation. While you are focused on the demanding work near the heat, the community gathered around might engage in other activities. There could be feasting and drinking, celebrations of the deceased's life and accomplishments, or continued periods of formal mourning and lamentation. You see this happening on the periphery, people eating, talking, perhaps singing or telling stories. It's a strange duality, intense, dangerous work for you, contrasting with social gathering for others. You're still part of the scene, but your role is one of labor, not leisure. It's a bit like being the designated driver at a party. You're there, but you're definitely not having the same experience as everyone else. A quirky or fringe tidbit that might occur during the burn is the possibility of throwing specific items into the raging flames as they burn. While most grave goods are placed on the pyre before ignition, some accounts suggest items, perhaps small, valuable objects or symbolic offerings, might be cast into the fire as it burns. This could be a dramatic gesture by family members or ritual leaders, or it could be part of your duty, being handed something precious, like a silver ring or a small amulet, and instructed to throw it into the heart of the fire. It's a final, deliberate act of consumption by the flames, a direct offering to the transformative power unleashed by the fire. You can almost hear the sizzle and pop as it's consumed. Historians still argue whether the behavior of the fire during the cremation was observed for omens or signs regarding the deceased's journey or the future of the community. Did the way the smoke rose, or how quickly certain parts burned, or the color of the flames, hold significance? Was the completeness of the burn interpreted as a sign of divine favor or the deceased's acceptance into the afterlife? It's difficult to say with certainty from the archaeological record alone, but many cultures interpret natural phenomena during rituals as carrying spiritual messages. You might notice others watching the flames intently, perhaps murmuring interpretations, while you are simply focused on keeping the pyre burning effectively. Your physical presence near the pyre, even pushed back by the heat, makes you a direct witness to the intense process of transformation. The structure you helped build, remember that sturdy pyre construction, the wood you gathered, all that aching effort, is now doing its work, breaking down the physical form and the earthly possessions. You see metal distorting and melting, organic materials turning to ash, the shapes you recognized being consumed and changed beyond recognition. It's a powerful visual metaphor for the end of life and the transition to another state. It's a gritty, hot, smoky, and perhaps profoundly moving experience, filled with the roar and crackle of consumption. You are the guardian of the fire, the one who helps ensure this final, fiery act is completed as intended. And you're definitely earning whatever meager compensation you might receive for this gig. After hours, perhaps a full day or even longer, the roaring intensity of the fire begins to wane. The towering flames subside, collapsing in on themselves, leaving behind a glowing, shifting landscape of embers, ash, and blackened wood. The heat, while still considerable, is no longer an overwhelming force pushing you back. It settles into a deep, radiating warmth. The sound shifts too, from a hungry roar to a quieter crackle and hiss, punctuated by the creaking and settling of the cooling pyre structure. The spectacle is over, replaced by the aftermath, a scene of profound, fiery transformation. Your work isn't finished. As the pyre cools enough to approach, which still takes time, you're definitely not walking onto it immediately, unless you want to join the chieftain in fiery transit. Your role becomes one of retrieval and collection. The goal now is to gather the remains of the deceased and any surviving grave goods that weren't completely consumed by the flames. This is a delicate, sometimes grisly task. You would likely be equipped with simple tools, shovels made of wood or bone, rakes, perhaps containers made of leather, wood, or woven fibers, to carefully sift through the ashes. The body itself will have been largely reduced to bone fragments and ash. The intense heat breaks down organic matter, but bones, particularly larger ones, often survive, though they will be brittle and perhaps discolored. Your task is to locate and gather these fragments. This requires a certain level of care and respect, despite the nature of the material. You are handling the physical remains of the person who was once the center of this elaborate ritual. A mainstream historical fact is that cremation burials often involve the careful collection of bone fragments from the pyre site, which were then placed in a vessel or small pit for final burial. Archaeological finds often consist of these collected bone fragments, sometimes alongside surviving artifacts. Alongside the bone fragments, you would also be looking for surviving grave goods. Metal objects, particularly iron and bronze, might have survived the fire, albeit often warped, melted, or heavily corroded. Glass and pottery might be shattered. Stone objects would likely survive. Precious metals like gold and silver, if they were robust enough or located in less intense parts of the fire, might survive relatively intact, though possibly misshapen. You are searching through the detritus of the fire for anything that remains, anything that wasn't fully claimed by the flames. It's like a morbid treasure hunt, where the treasure is often burnt and broken. Hope you didn't expect to find a fully intact, jewel-encrusted sword. More likely, you're finding melted lumps of what was a sword. This sifting and collection process could take considerable time. You'd be working meticulously, separating bone fragments from charcoal and ash, identifying surviving artifacts. The scene would be smoky, dusty, and silent save for the sounds of your work and the continued settling of the cooling pyre. The air would still smell strongly of smoke and burning. It's a physically dirty job, requiring patience and attention to detail. You have to be careful not to miss anything important. Whatever was deemed worthy of accompanying the deceased needs to be recovered, if possible. It's a bit like trying to find tiny Lego pieces after stepping on them in the dark, except, with human remains. A quirky or fringe tidbit could involve the specific items that did survive the fire and were deemed significant enough to collect. Sometimes, archaeologists find unexpected things among the cremated remains, small tools, beads, gaming pieces. These surviving items, often personal effects, offer a glimpse into the deceased's life and identity that weapons and wealth alone might not. Were certain items deliberately placed in locations on the pyre expected to burn less intensely? Was there a belief that certain materials were more resistant to the transformative fire and thus more suitable for the journey? It's a question without a definitive answer, but the presence of specific surviving objects suggests either chance, or perhaps, a degree of planning. Historians still argue about the spiritual significance of the collected remains and surviving artifacts. Were the bone fragments seen as retaining some essence of the deceased's spirit? Was the act of collecting them seen as essential for the spirit's successful passage to the afterlife? Or was the collection primarily about providing a tangible focus for the final burial in a grave or mound? The care taken in collecting the remains suggests it was an important part of the ritual, connecting the intense, dramatic cremation to the final resting place. Once the collection is complete, the remains, the bone fragments and surviving artifacts, would typically be placed in a container. This could be a ceramic pot, a wooden box, a cloth bag, or some other suitable vessel. This container is then usually taken to a final burial site, perhaps a grave dug nearby, or buried within a mound specifically constructed or already existing for the family or community. This final act of burial marks the completion of the physical rites surrounding the deceased. You, having facilitated the fiery transformation and gathered the remnants, would likely be involved in this final deposition, placing the container into the earth. The pyre site itself might be left as is, a blackened circle of ash and charcoal, or it might be covered with earth to form a mound, incorporating the remnants of the fire into the burial landscape. You've seen the process through from start to finish, from preparation to final placement of the transformed remains. It's a quiet end to a very loud and dramatic event. And hopefully, you got all the good bits. The fires have faded, the pyre has collapsed into ash and embers, and you've completed the demanding, dusty work of sifting through the remnants to collect the bone fragments and surviving artifacts. The container holding the transformed remains has been placed in its final resting spot, covered with earth or perhaps interred within a mound. The community begins to disperse, returning to their daily lives, perhaps forever changed by witnessing the powerful ritual. But what about you? What is your existence like after serving as a ritual assistant in such a significant, and potentially sacred, event? Your life doesn't necessarily undergo a dramatic, permanent transformation, at least not in terms of becoming a high-status individual yourself. You return to your previous station in the community, whether that was as a farmer, craftsman, or someone of lower status. The fields still need tending, the tools still need sharpening, the nets still need mending. The world keeps turning, and your place in its rhythm remains largely the same. You don't suddenly get a corner office in the longhouse or preferential treatment at the meat hall. It's not a career path with clear advancement opportunities. However, having participated in such a central ritual might subtly alter your position within the community. You are no longer just another face, you are someone who was involved in the send-off of a prominent individual. People might view you with a little more respect, perhaps a touch of awe, or even apprehension, depending on the specifics of the ritual and your known involvement. You were privy to intimate moments and handled potent objects during the ceremony. This shared experience, this knowledge of having been close to the transformative fire, could give you a quiet sort of significance. You might be someone whose presence is sought out for future rituals, or someone whose observations about the fire or the remains are considered insightful, perhaps even having a touch of the sacred about them. It's a subtle increase in social capital, perhaps, rather than a change in formal status. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the possibility that having handled the remains and been so close to the pyre could have conferred some form of ritual impurity or, conversely, ritual power. Were there cleansing rituals you had to undergo afterwards? Were you expected to abstain from certain activities for a period? Or were you now seen as having a connection to the spiritual realm or the ancestors, capable of mediating in some small way? Such beliefs existed in various forms in ancient cultures, and it's plausible that your close contact with the liminal space of the cremation pyre could have had some perceived lasting effect on your spiritual state or social role, however minor. You might find yourself feeling different, whether from the physical toll of the work or the psychological impact of the experience. Historians still argue about the social roles and status of individuals who performed specific tasks in Viking rituals, particularly those of lower status like thralls. Were they simply laborers, or did their participation in sacred acts, however forced, grant them any form of temporary or permanent ritual standing or protection? Accounts like Ibn Fadlan's, which describe the ritual killing of a thrall woman to accompany her master, are chilling outliers, highlighting the extreme end of social control and belief. For roles like yours, the more mundane but vital work of pyre assistance, the impact on your long-term status was likely minimal in formal terms, but perhaps more significant in the informal dynamics of community perception. You carry the physical memory of the ritual with you, the ache in your muscles, the lingering smell of smoke on your clothes, perhaps even a slight ringing in your ears from the fire's roar. And you carry the mental memory too, the sight of the deceased on the pyre, the intensity of the flames, the stark reality of sifting through ash. These memories become part of your lived experience, something that distinguishes you from those who merely watched from a distance. You were in the thick of it, a necessary part of facilitating this final, powerful journey. Your post-ritual existence is a return to the familiar routines, but with the added layer of this profound experience. You might be quieter, more contemplative, or perhaps you seek out the company of the others who shared the task with you, forging a bond through the shared labor and proximity to the fire. The pyre site itself, whether marked by a mound or just the blackened earth, remains a landmark, a place associated with the powerful event you helped bring about. You might pass by it regularly, a silent reminder of the time you stood at the edge of the inferno, ensuring the chieftain got his fiery send-off. And as the days turn into weeks and months, the immediate intensity fades, but the knowledge remains. You know what it feels like to help build a pyre, to stand near its heart, and to sift through the ashes of a life. It's a grim, dusty badge of honor, and it's now a quiet part of who you are in this Viking world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The roar of the fire is a distant echo now, fading not just from the landscape, but from your mind's ear. The acrid smell of smoke no longer clings to you quite so strongly, washed away by time and tide and rain. Your muscles have recovered from the heavy labor, your hands are less calloused. The pyre site is just a place on the horizon, maybe a raised mound or a scar on the earth, slowly softening back into the land. The intense heat, the blinding light, the crackling sounds, they recede into memory, becoming less immediate, less overwhelming. You are here, now, in the quiet. The journey we took together, back to the world of Viking cremations and your unexpected role, is reaching its end. You are no longer standing at the edge of the flames, no longer sifting through the ashes. You are safe, warm, perhaps tucked into your bed. The people of that distant time, the chieftain, the mourners, the other assistants, they are all part of history, their voices silenced, their rituals long concluded. Their beliefs, their fears, their hopes for the afterlife, they drift now like the faint smoke from a long-extinguished fire. Let the images fade gently. The longboat outline, the towering woodpile, the flicker of the torch, the silent gathering, the roar of the pyre, the quiet sifting. Let them dissolve, like ash scattered on the wind. There is only the present moment, the stillness of your room, the soft sounds of the night. Your breathing is steady, easy. The tension in your shoulders begins to ease. The stories are told, the history has unfolded. There is nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be. Just rest. Let sleep find you, a calm, deep, and peaceful sleep. The fire is out. The work is done. You are safe.